1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human, without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli, would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man, who claimed to have nothing left to live for, was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the subject remained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke about his state and mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was the onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns.
You don't believe me.
2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking to him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but not convinced. Until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated the personal information of the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents could have known. At that point, a sizable portion of the scientists left the study.
Your husband, the one that died of a car accident, engine failure.
After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to lick a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives, so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days. Until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could hear the deceased and see them in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something of the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continued begging to be killed, but the scientists were convinced he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. Scientists rushed into the death chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with the scientist for the first time in the study. And then he whispered,
I have spoken with God. He has abandoned us.
and his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death.